Three former Labour MPs charged with criminal offences in relation to abuses of parliamentary expenses have won the right to have their legal fees paid by the taxpayer. The former MPs were granted legal aid by administrators at Southwark Crown Court. The Conservative leader David Cameron said the decision was an outrage, but tonight Labour has accused him of hypocrisy. Our political correspondent Richa Chakrabarti has the story.
Where's our money gone?
When Jim Devine, David Chater and Elliot Morley emerged from their first court appearance last month, the interest in them was intense. The three men were all accused of making dishonest expenses claims relating to mortgage applications, rent and invoices for cleaning and IT. Today it's emerged that the taxpayer will be picking up their legal bill. The Tory leader turned their claim into an election issue, saying he'd change the rules.
People who wouldn't even stand in the dock and answer the charges now expect all of you to pay for their legal defence. Well, I can tell you something. We're having a review of legal aid under a Conservative government. You can't preview and prejudice every part of that review, but I can tell you what, there won't be legal aid available for members of Parliament who are accused of fiddling their expenses.
In fact, the rules are being changed by the government. Until now, anyone at risk of going to prison if convicted could get legal aid. That's gradually being changed for a means-tested system. But here at Southwark Crown Court, where the politicians are being tried, that scheme isn't yet up and running.
Mr Brown, should these MPs get legal aid, Mr Brown?
It wasn't a question Gordon Brown was stopping to answer. The former MP's legal aid claim, bang in the middle of an election campaign, is just embarrassing. But the Justice Secretary went on the offensive, accusing the Tories of hypocrisy.
Mr Cameron says one thing in front of the cameras, but his own people, as it were, off camera, have said and have acted in a very different way. I'm in favour of Mr Cameron now saying he's backing our changes to introduce means testing.
The Tories deny opposing means testing, but with the Liberal Democrats adding their voices to criticism of the government, the expenses affair has suddenly erupted again. The MPs may have gone, but the fallout from the scandal continues to dog the political world. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Westminster.
9 people are now known to have died in a
The parliamentary expenses scandal has claimed another victim. The Barnsley MP, Eric Ilsley, has become the first sitting MP to be convicted for fiddling his expenses. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of fraud. Mr Ilsley made £14,000 in false claims relating to his second home. He's already been suspended by the Labour Party and, depending on his sentence, he could face disqualification from Parliament. Here's our political editor, Nick Robinson.
From ballot box to courtroom dock and almost certainly to jail in less than a year. That is the story of Eric Ilsley, who made a lonely trip to Southwark Crown Court today, where unexpectedly he pleaded guilty to fraud. The MP for Barnsley Central admitted today what he previously denied, making fraudulent claims for parliamentary expenses of more than £14,500 to cover council tax, maintenance and repair bills and household bills for a second home in London. Just one problem, they were all false. Mr Ilsley is now waiting to hear his sentence, but voters in Barnsley are already giving their verdict.
Me or you did that, then, you know, we'd end up in can straight away, wouldn't it? So it's good for goose, it's good for gander, really.
I mean, he's supposed to be left-wing, he's supposed to be a man at people, and I just think he's let his family down as well, and I think it's appalling.
A former official of the National Union of Mine Workers, Ilsley was popular and respected here for the stand he made for miners made ill by their time down the pit. Last week, David Chater, once also a Labour MP, pleaded guilty to fiddling his expenses at the same court in front of the same judge. He was sent to prison for 18 months. What makes Eric Ilsley different is that he stood last May as a Labour MP and was re-elected with a majority of 11,000.
And I do hereby declare that the said Eric Ilsley is duly elected for the Barnsley Central constituency.
The allegations against him were known then, but he denied them. He praised his opponents for the way they'd behaved.
Can I commiserate with my fellow candidates and congratulate them on the way they've conducted themselves throughout this campaign?
When he was charged by the police, Labour suspended him. Today, the party leader called for him to be expelled from the Commons.
Eric Ilsley has been found guilty of a very serious charge. He is no longer a Labour Member of Parliament. I think he should now do the right thing and resign as a Member of Parliament, because I don't think he can be a credible voice for his constituents, having pleaded guilty to such a serious offence.
This saga began with the leaking to the Telegraph of MPs' claims, with a rule book with almost no rules, with claims for cleaning moats and for duck houses. But this, say MPs, was different.
What we saw today, and in the former case, is criminality, way beyond any laxity, way beyond any playing the system. It was pure crime, and there is a price to be paid.
His months of denials at an end, Eric Ilsley left court today and even managed to smile. When he returns here, he may leave in a prison van.
And Nick Robinson is in Westminster for us. Nick, even though we've followed the scandal from the beginning, we're still entitled to ask, how on earth has it come to this, a man going to jail, possibly?
Yes, that is the £14,500 question in the case of Mr Ilsley. We don't know because he hasn't said why he did it. But let me hazard a pretty well-informed guess, George. I think Mr Ilsley, like many MPs, had a simple view, that they had a system of allowances. Note the word, not expenses, allowances. Money they believed they were allowed to claim in order to add to a salary that was kept lower than they thought it should be by governments who were scared of the electorate's reaction to an MP's pay rise. Party officials, Commons officials encouraged MPs to claim to the max to get all they could. Some MPs found it easy to get the receipts. Wealthier ones had big mortgages, even that mortgage to clean. Poorer ones had to scrabble the receipts together, looking for one for a bathroom sink plug, for example, or even for one of those big flat screen TVs. Some, like Mr Ilsley, actually simply made their claims up, which is why tonight he faces a prison sentence. Now, you may assume, George, that he also faces being kicked out of the Commons, but under bizarre rules, you can stay an MP while you're in prison so long as your sentence is just 12 months. If that happens, though, MPs will have to do something rare, which is vote to expel one of their own. Rare it might be, but I think they'll do it.
All right, Nick, thanks very much.
Former Labour MP Jim Devine has been found guilty of false accounting. The first Member of Parliament to choose to face a jury's verdict, Mr Devine was convicted on 2 counts after submitting sham invoices totalling over £8,000. Also today, Eric Ilsley, the MP for Barnsley Central, until he resigned just 3 days ago, was sentenced to 12 months in prison. Last month, Mr Ilsley pleaded guilty to dishonestly claiming £14,500 on expenses. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, reports.
For Jim Devine, a day of very public legal ritual and very public humiliation. Former Labour MP for Livingston arrived to hear the verdict on him. He'd spent at least 8 hours at a previous hearing at Southwark Crown Court, giving evidence which was sometimes seen as both confused and contradictory. His version of events, for instance, differing on key issues from the one he gave to Channel 4 News, which was replayed in full in court.
I did not financially benefit by these 2 receipts. But in simple terms, you submitted a claim for £5,500 for stationery. You did not spend £5,500 on stationery, did you? You spent some of it on something else. But I moved money around as I was told you were entitled to do.
Jim Devine was the first MP to stand trial over the expenses issue, and the jury took some 2 hours to reach their verdict. In the end, they found him guilty on 2 of 3 counts of falsifying expenses claims.
Jim Devine said the expenses he claimed from Parliament were going to pay a number of people. Larissa, the pub cleaner, she's never been traced. A second Polish cleaner, also called Larissa, also never traced. Her brother Tommy and her partner Arthur apparently helped out with the handiwork, and the parliamentary researcher known in court as Miss X, because Jim Devine refused to identify her. The prosecution said the second Larissa, Tommy, Arthur and Miss X had all been invented by Jim Devine.
The falsifying expenses claims involved around £3,000 worth for cleaning and some £5,000 worth of stationery expenses, money which went straight into the pocket of the former MP.
Leaving court, Devine's lawyer said his client was instructed to remain silent. He didn't. He said to his lawyer, "Come on, let's go," as soon as humanly possible, only to be followed down the road by the cameras.
We've got enough, guys.
But in truth, this is the public humiliation the public very much demands, and it's not over yet. Devine due back here next month to be sentenced. He can expect to go to prison. 2 hours later, another former MP, Eric Ilsley this time, who resigned 3 days ago, here to receive the inevitable prison sentence, pleading guilty to 3 counts of false expenses totalling around £14,000 of public money.
I, Eric Ilsley, do solemnly...
The judge paid tribute to Ilsley's hard work and good character in every aspect of his life, except this one. Ilsley himself had owned up early on, pleaded guilty, and said it was just plain greed.
Sentencing Mr Ilsley, Mr Justice Saunders took into account his otherwise good character. He said he is a man who's done a lot of good. But, he said, it's vital that people are able to trust our legislators and their use of public funds. Rebuilding that trust is likely to be a long process. He went on, of course, Mr Ilsley only bears a small part of the responsibility for that loss of trust, but it is a significant part.
Jailed for 1 year, he is, in the judge's words, a broken man from which situation there is no way back. Alex Thompson, Channel 4 News, Southwark Crown Court in Central.